One of the easiest main or primary damage dealers to build, Yanqing is a exceptional DPS. If you have gotten him either from the standard banner or maybe you lost a 50-50 to him, don't be disappointed because he can carry you either in simulated universe or just in general gameplay. Yanqing's general ease of use comes from his traces or specifically his skill. By its own, his skill doesn't necessarily do anything particularly special. However, it does activate Soul Steel Sync, which is, I believe, one of the primary reasons he's so easy to build, but also subsequently one of the reasons people don't necessarily understand him. Soul Steel Sync at a basis gives him around 15% crit rate and 20% critical damage. It subsequently also has a 50-50 chance to perform a follow-up attack. This is incredibly important much later on. However, as a whole, this 15% base doesn't matter as much as the additional 60% crit rate he also gets during his ultimate. This means that Yanqing is incredibly easy to build in the crit rate department because you can funnel everything into crit damage. Just as a showcase here, when Yanqing doesn't have Soul Steel Sync active, this icon in the bottom left of his character screen will not show anything. As you can see here, Soul Steel Sync hasn't been used as he hasn't done any actions. However, once you use his skill, a small icon pops up in the bottom left hand side, indicating that Soul Steel Sync is active and his crit rate and crit damage is increased. This can also just be noticed by the glowing sword he has. One of the primary reasons people discount Yanqing is because he does require a shielder. Fire main character works perfectly well, or a March 7th or Jeopard. The reason is Yanqing will lose Soul Steel Sync if he's hit, or more specifically if he takes damage. So as long as the shield is damaged and not his overall HP, he's perfectly fine. But the moment that is touched even by 1 degree, he loses this bonus effect. For most of you individuals, the crit rate from his ultimate will be enough overall. However, this does affect some of his general rotations. Now, in addition to the base crit he has, which is already 38%, he gains an additional 60% during his ultimate, as you saw the crit rate and crit damage bonus. This means that for the vast majority of you, should you have at least 20% crit on its own, excluding any buffs from Soul Steel Sync or his ultimate itself, he's very likely to overcap on crit rate, meaning that you should essentially be focusing all in for crit damage substat. Now, some of the ideal compositions means that he essentially, because of his versatility and the ease of use, he does have particular teammates he wants to be paired with, like either the main character or March 7th, but other than that, he's relatively speaking flexible. You can throw in a Bailu for additional healings, a Pella if you want to go down the route of increasing his damage, an Asta to increase his speed. Pretty much anybody else works in the random 2 slots. If you feel as though you have a Jeopard or somebody else who can essentially mitigate your entire team's damage to the extent to where you don't need a healer, you can go all in on maxing out his damage. Something else to consider though is that Yanqing doesn't have any essential resurgence like Zele does. He doesn't have any AoE in the slightest. Now, you can mitigate this in Simulated Universe with the additional of remembrance buffs, which would essentially spread out that ice damage, but for the most part, he's single target in every aspect. And he's essentially great for bosses, because unlike Zele, his damage isn't entirely reliant, or at least incredibly dependent, on him defeating other opponents. For traces, his talent, skill, and ultimate will be leveled up in equal respect to one another, because his basic attack, realistically, you don't want to use this, simply because even though he's not hit, if Soul Steel Sync is currently active and you use a basic attack, Soul Steel Sync will be lost. This means that you essentially always want to funnel your skill points into either only him, so he can constantly use his skill, or ensure that if you have enough energy, use his ult before he has to basic attack. If you're choosing to prioritize Eidolons, I would personally prioritize Icing on the Kick and then Gentle Blade. Frost Favors the Brave isn't exactly useful in a lot of scenarios if you can mitigate the amount of damage he's taking. This means by having a taunt like Fire MC, or by placing March 7th shield or a light cone that adds taunt onto another character. Pick the minor ones up as you see fit. For Relics, it's relatively simple. Just get Hunter of the Glacial Forest. That's honestly all you would need. It's just a crit damage bonus for him and ice damage bonus. That's it. For main stats, it's the same as usual. Crit damage for the body piece, speed or attack for the boots, ice damage boost for the sphere, and then attack for the final rope. The nerd set is great for that slight crit rate bonus, but the main priority will be the ultimate and follow-up damage bonus increase. This is because if Soul Steel Sync is active in that 50-50 procs, the additional damage he deals is considered follow-up damage or a follow-up attack. He's a 5-star unit. I'm not really going to consider Eidolons, but all of them are great. However, his E1 is exceptional in the simulated universe with remembrance buffs. If you want to go down the route of specifically looking at light cones, obviously you have his original one, which is the one featured in shop. That works great. You have Zele's specific Eidolon. This, I would say, is a bit of an iffy choice, specifically because you don't want to overcap on crit, because that could realistically be put into either crit damage, attack, or other substats, and most of the time he's not going to be overcapping on speed unless you're pairing him with Asta. Cruising in the LSCs is a good light cone, and it does offer lower crit rate in comparison to Zele's light cone. However, the difference is the bonuses you would reap from this are essentially lost if you only choose to focus on single target bosses whilst your team focuses on smaller mobs, or if you don't deal with small mobs in general, as in you're facing off against Kokoli or something like that. Ignoring the 5-star options, any 4-star option works well. Your main problem that you'll be facing off with Yanqing is that crit rate. Even with only Silence Remains, the additional crit rate of 15% can be a bit of a loss in the event that you have a bunch of crit rate on your relics. If you're facing off against ice weak opponents, Yanqing already applies enough ice to an extent to where he's extremely good at diminishing that he excels against ice weak opponents or against frozen opponents. So remembrance buffs in the simulated universe work wonders for him, but also he's extremely good at breaking down weakness bars in the event the opponent is weak to ice. I would honestly say that for the vast majority of users who don't feel like hunting down relics, Yanqing is, for a vast majority of you at least, going to be a better pick, or at least a better investment than Zele, because he requires lower investment to get a higher damage number. Because you can ignore crit rate, and because you don't necessarily have to focus so much on speed, he can dip pretty heavily into the attack and crit damage department. Whereas with Zele, you kind of want to balance out crit rate, crit damage, attack, and speed. If you have him, build him. His only issue is he would like to be paired with March 7th, the Fire Trailblazer, or Japard, just to keep him alive. You can mitigate that with any light cone on any of them, but he's flexible enough that your only real worry will be crit rate over cap. This is just going to be an example of how to play Yanqing, and more specifically, how to position your team. Because something I want a lot of individuals to consider is that most of the time your preservation units will be attacked first, and Yanqing as a hunt character is the least likely to be attacked, but you don't want to position any unit who is either inclined to be attacked or doesn't necessarily have any way to mitigate the damage for the entire team near Yanqing, because he may get hit with the splash damage. In this instance, we have March 7th's ultimate ready, so we're going to use that immediately because Yanqing does more damage if the opponent is either frozen or has an ice weakness. Next, we're going to use his skill to apply Soul Steel Sync, which as you can see is active in the bottom left. March 7th will be used to apply a shield onto him. And then we're going to have Natasha basic attack. We have 3 skill points ready for him. You can use your buff, whether it is an Asta or a Qingyun. In this instance, I'm using Asta because everybody gets her for free. And then Yanqing again. As you can see, he crit hit there because he does indeed have Soul Steel Sync active.